actually won the Dance of the Dragons? Now, it seems like an easy answer at first, but over the last 4 years of making videos, and looking at all your comments since the start of House of the Dragon, it seems the answer a bit more complicated than meets the eye, with different people having different standards and definitions of winning the dance. Who wins and loses has nothing to do with whether you think the blacks or the greens are in the right. That's a subject for a whole other video. And again, another topic open for interpretation. But in my view, there are 3 answers to who won the Dance of the Dragons. That depends on how you view the impact of the outcome. For me, the first 2 are obvious. The blacks or the greens won. For both sides, what was the goal of the war? To seat their claimants on the Iron Throne and effectively kill the other side. While there were some offers of peace, both sides realistically knew that was never going to happen, as things had escalated way too far for one side or the other to back down. So in this case, when we look at the Dance of the Dragons as a war and a conflict within the time that it occurred, then I think you can say in the short-term view, the Greens won. Aegon was crowned king and held King's Landing for a while after the war, but most importantly, he killed Rhaenyra, who had the rival claim. With nearly all of the senior blacks dead or no longer in a position to carry on the war, other than find a peaceful solution. So for a short time, until the march of Cregan Stark and the plotting in the halls of the Red Keep, Aegon was king, with his only rival being a 10-year-old boy he held captive. So you could argue from that point of view, Aegon and the Greens won the war in the short term. However, while you could argue the Greens won the war in the short term, when you look at the longer term picture, Aegon would soon be dead, his mother a prisoner, all his brothers dead, and his only surviving child a pawn, who would be removed eventually, while Rhaenyra and most of the blacks would also be dead. Rhaenyra's blood, her sons, would eventually sit the Iron Throne, and her bloodline would continue to rule, even as she did not. If you take a longer term view of the Dance of the Dragons, you could then make a fair argument the blacks really won. But here is the thing, and this is the view that I hold. Short term or long term, can you hand on heart say either side really won the war? Nearly every senior member of House Targaryen was dead, with the number of survivors being countable on one hand. But on top of that, nearly every dragon ended up dead as well. Yes, there were a small number left, but the damage was really done. While House Targaryen still commanded great power after the dance, it would never be the same without the threat of their dragons. Some could argue the house would even go on to thrive for another 150 years in some ways, even without the dragons. But the dragons were a huge part of them, and they were diminished greatly without them. That's not even considering the personal losses of each side. For the blacks, we have Rhaenyra, 3 of her children, Daemon, Rhaenys, Admiral Hull. For the Greens, Aegon, Aemon, Daeron, Helaena, Maelor, Jaehaerys, Criston Cole, Otto. That's only scratching the surface. Nearly every major house in the 7 Kingdoms suffering losses, not even considering the impact on the common folk. Think of some of the horror that occurred. Lucerys' death at the hands of Aemon at Storm's End, the brutal death of Joffrey in the final days of the war, the horrific blood and cheese incident, the battles of Bitterbridge, and the gruesome death of Maelor, Tumbleton, the fish feed. When you look at the war in this context, it's really hard to say that anyone won. Finally, there is another way you can look at the question. If you are a believer of the Grand Maester conspiracy, that the Citadel and the Faith were manipulating events from behind the scenes to remove the Targaryens and kill the dragons, there are many different versions of this theory that all go to various extents of involvement, with some saying they only orchestrated the dance, while others saying it goes further back to some of the deaths of Jaehaerys' children, and to some extent Maegor. So if you do believe this theory, and it was all planned by the Maesters, I would say they achieved their objective of irreparably damaging Targaryen rule. In my opinion, the whole war from the onset is a grey conflict with no right or wrong answers, with 2 sides with strong claims and legitimate grievances. 2 sides who committed horrific acts against the other, with the only outcome being grief and death. When you look at the short-term or long-term victory, or believe the Maester conspiracy, at the end of the day, in my view, everyone lost. No one won. And that's what makes it such a compelling story and conflict.